All right, I think we are live. Hello, hello. If you can see us, if you can hear us when you're jumping on, can you please say hi? Can you give us some comments, give us some love, give us some likes so we know that you guys can see and hear us okay? Because I'm going to be honest, I don't know the the streaming to Facebook these days is quite something. So I'm just trying to maneuver through these streets of doing something new. So, if you guys see us on here, please say hi. Let us know. I don't even know how to see the comments. That's how much this is so weird to me. But without further ado, I'm just going to jump into it and introduce to you guys our very special guest today. I'm so excited to introduce to you all uh, Mr. Lawrence Whittam, which I would have pronounced that wrong about 5 minutes ago if
Yeah.
I didn't get the spelling correct on his name. Laurence is the founder and managing director of Impact Global Solutions with over a decade of experience in the outsourcing and offshoring industry. Laurence has worked with more than 500 firms, ranging from sole practitioners to top 30 CPA firms. He is recognizing the challenges firms face in effectively offshoring. Laurence is dedicated his career to providing education, guidance, and strategic support to help businesses optimize their operations. He is also a published author in the industry leading publications, including the AI CPA, and has developed a comprehensive best practice toolkit for successful outsourcing. So, thank you so much, Laurence, for being with us today, for joining us and joining my audience. I know that they are going to get a lot of value from hearing from you today. So why don't you take a minute and tell us how you got into this offshore space, how you ended up working with accountants and in this offshore space. I would love to learn more about this.
Yeah, definitely. No, and really appreciate you bringing me on, Alyssa. So, and again, it was nice meeting you this year, and again, I'm glad that you're also having a bit of a summer as well. So that's good to know. So yeah, I used to be. Well, I actually had an awesome opportunity coming out of college. Like it was a family friend of mine that was starting an outsourcing firm. He had developed it for the UK already, and he needed somebody he could trust to bring the business towards the US side of things. So he brought me over to India for 3 months, and I got the opportunity to really learn the culture and what outsourcing really looked like. And then immediately helped them expand over here in the US market and really took the hands-on role of a learning the business, learning the accounting profession, and learning how what CPAs need, what problems they're having, and everything. So I was more on the provider side initially, and I did that for about 9 years, and we've worked with over 600 firms now, I would say, during that process. And I also worked in a CPA firm myself, a top 50 firm for a couple of years in addition to that. So I've been inside the business and learned it as well. And what I found was that there was nobody really independently sort of being on the side of a CPA firm to help them explore options when it came to outsourcing and offshoring and any sort of alternate staffing options, because there's just so much competition in the market. So it was sort of creating a lot of cloudiness and confusion as to where they should go, who they should use. So I sort of took a step back and said that I would prefer, rather than being on the, the provider side, really supporting the firms to effectively utilize it, no matter who they used, right? Whether they wanted
Right.
to go to India, whether they wanted to go to the Philippines, figuring out like what was the best option for their firm rather than relying on the best relationship with a salesperson that pretty much is what it comes down to in a lot of cases working with somebody. Um, and making sure they really had a clear direction from an expectation perspective as to what it can look like, right? If they do it successfully, how to do it successfully. So now I'm pretty hands-on with that side of things, working with sole proprietors up to large firms and making sure they're educated on it before they get into it and also during it, like fixing the problems that generally come up. And there's most people outsourcing generally have stresses that will come up quite quickly.
Yep.
And I saw a lot of people taking the step of, okay, this doesn't work, which wasn't really the case. It was just that they needed to do things a certain way. They needed to change the way that their firm was working as well internally before they were going to have a positive effect outsourcing as well, or even staffing domestically, like and bringing new team members on. Like they had to change things in their process in order to make it work. So that's where I step in now and help the firms.
Yeah. So I'm familiar in, outsourcing offshore. So what do you think? So can you explain to me and for everyone else here, like what types of things should we be outsourcing offshore? Because I think for some of us, we're just like, well, we'll just do this little bit here. We'll just give them this little piece of bookkeeping. We'll just do this because we still want to hold on to this. So can you talk about like what you have seen as like the options of outsourcing? Like what types of things should we do as accounting professionals? What should we be outsourcing and what options do we have? And what are we maybe not utilizing?
So I would say it's easier to answer the question of what shouldn't we be outsourcing, right? And that's generally speaking is the client relationship aspect, right? So
Yeah.
we should be realistically as a owner of a firm or as a senior team member in some sense in a firm, a partner, whatever the case is, you should be focused on how do I take a lot of that compliance aspect out of my day-to-day working, right? How do I take a lot of the behind the scenes compliance, emailing, management, those types of responsibilities, take those off the table or limit the amount that I actually have to do that. Focus more on the let me review this and finalize this before it goes to a client to ensure that it's being done correctly. And then let me communicate with the client and keep building a relationship, keep showing, doing the advisory type of service to add on, again, show value to the client more so than necessarily just that compliance aspect, right? So I've seen now it should go across in stages. It shouldn't be day one, let me give full bookkeeping assignment across offshore. Like, because it's very no matter what an outsourcing firm tells you, it's still quite person dependent, right? You have to be able to teach that person or outsourcing firm your process the way you like it. Even domestically, if I give the same project to two different firms, they're going to give me a different result back at the end, right? Whether it's a tax project, whether it's an accounting project, they will give it back to me in a different format. In a lot of cases, with sometimes different answers, different things done wrong in there. So you need to make sure that you have really identified like what things you do best in your firm and that you want to do. Everything else, create a process around it, right? And then really standardize that to make sure there is consistency and put controls around that, right? So
Right.
it can be everything though. Like I've seen firms doing the client communication offshore as well, but it typically doesn't come day one. It comes year two, year three when they've got more consistency with their employees offshore, and when they've really like built up that culture of they know what they're going to say, they know that they work in the same way that they want them to work, they know they can interact with a client correctly, but it's typically not that stage. That's typically like the things you should keep onshore because you can show your value there.
Right. Right. And so when we're talking about offshoring, I know a lot of people have a lot of fears around it, right? There's a lot of these fears. Can you talk a little bit about what would you say to somebody who has like these fears brought up? What are the most common fears you see in here? And what would you say to some of these people who may be watching this right now who are thinking like, I'm a little nervous about doing that?
So put them down on paper, right? As to what are your biggest fears, right, when it comes to this, right? Now also what would make you feel comfortable with a provider? What do they have to say in order and show you in order to actually put that comfort in mind, right? And there's different things to that, right? I mean, cyber is probably one of the big ones. That's a very consistent problem that comes up, like cyber and IT and how that looks. And again, you've got to be then understanding of, okay, what is that level of internet security that you really want, and cyber security? Like, is it that you want them to have an audit every year, right? Typically, if we're a small firm, I mean, we don't do an audit internally, right?
Right.
It's of like we don't have a SOC 2 compliant audit every year, right? We may have controls in place, but is it just the fear of they're in a different location, right? So, okay, what controls can you put in place? You can say, I need this person to work in an office rather than working from home, right? That may bring that comfort level there, right? Now, one provider may say, we don't do offices because we can't get the talent pool. But again, another office will allow that, right? So you need to make sure that you have those sort of challenges that you are facing personally, document them down. Another big one is communication, right? So again, same sort of thing. Okay, what is it that you really just struggle to communicate with people in India, right? Or people in the Philippines, right? Depending upon where it is, maybe that means, okay, don't go to India if you have a problem communicating with an Indian person in a lot of cases, or really put a strict guideline as to, hey, listen, I really need somebody with very strong communication skills. And they're the only types of people that you work with through that firm. So you can put a lot of controls in place, even from an expectation perspective, to ensure that it overcomes that, right? And now the only thing I would just say to keep in mind is don't expect the lowest cost provider, right, to have all those things in place, right? Because they're not going to be able to afford that, right? And same
Right.
thing, don't expect a business with 50 to 100 people offshore to be able to do a SOC audit every year, right? They may follow other standards or do a different type of cyber security audit, for example. But you then may have to go to a bigger player if you really want to have that, right? But then you'll also have different negatives with that, right? You're not going to be the biggest client for them, right? You're not going to be growing at the same pace as some of the large firms. So you've just got to be cognizant of that, right? Some of the benefits, there are risks to every provider as well, and downfalls for that.
Okay. And I'm just going to tell everybody, I apologize if I look so freaking distracted. I have so many issues going on with my camera right now. I swear. So at one point, it must have just been something going on with my screen, but the Zoom was literally just spinning like in circles. It was the most wild situation. And I was trying to figure it out if it was just me that was seeing it this way or if everyone was seeing it this way, because I was like, shoot, if everyone is seeing this, we have to stop this and we have to start over. And I was getting so freaked out, and my camera's glitching the whole time. And so I was like, I am so glad that Lawrence is just like talking away and just killing it and jamming right now so I could deal with these camera issues that I'm having. So
You could.
luckily, the camera doesn't seem to be flipping. It was like flipping our faces just over and
Okay.
over and over, but it doesn't seem to be doing that. From what I can tell on this live stream, it was just doing it on my computer. And I was like, what's going on? This is insane looking. I was like, if people are watching this, they must think that we're like trying to host a rave. So I apologize for looking so incredibly distracted. But that is what was going on. It was just, I had to make sure I could figure it out. But I think I have it all figured out. I think we're good now. So, great stuff so far. If you're watching, we have quite a few people on right now. Can you let us know if do you guys have any specific questions for Lawrence on outsourcing? And really what are your if you're outsourcing offshore right now, what are your questions about outsourcing offshore? What are your bigger fears around it? What is a challenge for you right now? Because you literally have the expert right here to ask. So we might as well take advantage of this opportunity to get this information from Laurence. So, I think there is also this concept of and this might be like a newer thing when you're getting started. I think a lot of people um a lot of people think, oh, if I send work out of the US, right? How do you come across this a lot, like sending work out of the US and people's thoughts around it? I know this was a big thing for me when I first started my business. I was like, oh, well, there's so many people in the United States that need work. I'm going to send work offshore and I'm not going to keep work in the United States. I'm not going to create jobs here. And so, do you want to address that? I know this was kind of part of the fears,
Yeah.
but I also think addressing this specifically would be huge for some people because I know I talk about outsourcing offshore all the time to some of my firm owners as a way to have a more inexpensive option as they're getting started and our newer solopreneurs who are like, yeah, but I can't afford it right now. And I'm like, well, you could try an offshore strategy, right? But they're like, oh, but aren't people going to look down on me for doing that? So can you address that for us?
Yeah, yeah. So I would say there's sort of two parts to that as well. Like there's actually a somewhat of a cyber side of it that we can mention afterwards. But from the culture side, like I've been in many conversations over the years. Like I wouldn't even be able to count how many that again just people would prefer to hire onshore if they could, right? They would prefer to keep the work domestically if they could, right? But there are lots of ways that again, it can be actually a feeder system to hiring onshore, right? As well. Like if you were able to save 50% compared to hiring onshore in a lot of cases, right? You can start up with a full-time resource and start to develop processes and policies and procedures for those types of roles and responsibilities where when you get to a stage where now, okay, you may be able to take on two or three people before you have enough resources to be able to take on a full-time domestic person in a lot of cases, depending on where you are in the US, right? So it gives you that way that you can actually start to scale, right? And like I said, I mean, if you don't want to have the face of the company being offshore, that's, in my opinion, it shouldn't be, right? You're
Right.
doing it in order to grow your business, take on your back office responsibilities in a lot of cases, because a lot of the times, especially when it comes to accountants, right? And they also don't want to stay doing the same data entry type work over and over again. And it's very repetitive, right? They don't necessarily want to work on the same clients doing the same things when they get full all the time, right? So you're going to eventually come up to a point where you're now going to have to either replace that person anyway because they're looking for a different opportunity where they've got bigger career paths, right, that they can go to, or you have to think of how do I now take that person to the next step in their career, right? And in order to do so, they need somebody to pass the work on, right? So again,
Right.
it becomes like what I've seen is a lot of firms wait until they are not just full to the brim, but like overflowing with work before they even take somebody on, right? And this is where that
Yeah.
culture of let's get 70-hour work weeks going during tax season. No, why would you need to? You can use somebody else like like just for a period of time, right? There is resources not just offshore but domestically, right? You have like different providers now offering like if you really don't want to go offshore, there are businesses you can work with that can do tax returns, right? But you'll find that the people that are doing that and servicing you on the back end, even if they're CPAs, they're typically working full time for another firm, so they only are available to you during the weekends and or outside of normal business hours. So again, you still have to change the way you work in order to make those providers actually work, right? So it's you've got onshore options too, right? But
Yep.
you're not going to have the savings that are the same, right? You could onshore a tax return for $300 to $500, or you can go offshore and do it for $75 to $150, right? With a similar result, right? Maybe you need to put a bit more into the offshore one initially until you've built that process a bit more. But I've seen it a lot of times that even if you put a CPA on the project that doesn't know your systems or processes, the work comes back not as expected, right? And not to the level as expected, even still, even though they're domestic and because they don't know the way that you want it, right? At the
Yeah.
end of the day. So it's and I think the easiest place to start for a lot of people, really, even if you're in the accounting world, is why don't you just start with some marketing, some back office admin, right?
Yep.
Email management. If you don't want to necessarily do the work offshore, like the bookkeeping, the accounting, the tax, stuff like that, start with those tasks that you're doing and get a virtual admin. You'll get to know
Yeah.
like what they're capable of, and then slowly transition them into maybe bookkeeping and different things, right?
Yeah.
And and one of the things you mentioned around like the sending work, right? Again, this is one of those big misconceptions in a lot of cases now is that work did used to get sent a lot, but now we control our environment. So everybody's using cloud systems. So you actually control the access point, right? In a lot more cases. So no work, it's not like you're sending work to an offshore facility. That person, as long as you've done the right background check on an individual, right, which the outsourcing firms do, you can request to have the forms to see, like, okay, what was their background experience? What did they have any red flags come up on credit checks and things like that, right, that you may want them to do. But the actual business side, like no data is being moved anywhere because you're giving
Right.
them access to your document storage, which you can limit the access in any software, right? You're giving them access to your accounting software and all these things. So now there is actually no movement of data in any cases, right? It's just the eyes on the other side of the screen. So that's the other piece where there's more concern, but you can create controls to actually make it more secure if that's what your concern is.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, awesome. And so I guess like would you recommend I think this is and I'm just reading some of the questions we have here and I'm kind of extracting and extrapolating, but so based on based on my experience, I've actually had more luck going through like an agency to offshore work than I have from hiring you like individually, like going through a place it's recommended like onlinejobs.ph, right? Where you're
Mhm.
hiring directly to the Philippines. I didn't have as much luck with that. I kind of found that process frustrating. A lot of people were applying that were not even qualified for the specific job I was talking about. And so I ended up just going straight direct to a specific type of agency
Yeah.
that does that specific work that I'm interested in, talk to the salesperson and said, "This is what I'm looking for. You can place this person in my company." And they were like, "Yes, this is exactly what we're going to do. This is who we're going to give you." And that also meant if I was unhappy with the work or the person or it wasn't a good personality fit, they were going to replace them for me and they were going to do the training. Like it just felt so much cleaner, so much easier. Is this what you're finding as well? Like talk to me about your experience and what you're recommending on your side.
Yeah, so and it depends on the firm, right? At the
Mhm.
end of the day, I mean, it's very custom to what the firm needs is what I'm trying to understand. In a lot of cases, I'm doing like an assessment of who they are, what they want, what control they want over that team members. Like, do they really understand like the difference between everything? But you somewhat got a spectrum, right? And like you said, like the you went at first the one end of the complete one end of the spectrum where you were really hiring offshore, right? And you were going through the sourcing of candidates, like they were applying to you, but it was a portal where people can at least go in and apply. And you will get a lot of applicants, right? A lot of not good applicants, right? But you have to do that process of them weeding them out. When you take them on, then you are fully responsible for them. They may go and find another job, right? They may be consistently looking. They're probably going to most likely be work from home. You don't have the infrastructure in place, right? So a lot of them will use a laptop they already have, right? There may be certain requirements they have to be on that site for. However, you are hiring them just like a contractor working from home, right?
Yep.
Compared to the normal side of it is working at least with an agency where they handle like the legal payroll side of things, but then there are ones that move up the ladder essentially that do have infrastructure. They have an office they can bring in people into, right? They'll tell you like, okay, you should be offering XYZ benefits to them, right? They'll facilitate, but you have to pay for it, right? They'll handle the hardware for you, right? And it keeps moving up the ladder essentially as a checklist of what you want. But one of the big differences between like an employer of record slash PEO between that and a traditional agency is that they do not manage the team members whatsoever, right? You were going more towards the traditional agency where they actually can go as far as like doing it more productized, right? They control the team members. They're never going to be your employees. You can interact with them one on one. Sometimes there's a mediator there. Sometimes there's a manager that you're communicating with. That manager may not be doing the work. It may be a bookkeeper first. It goes up to like a manager that reviews it. It comes back to you, right? They do a lot of the client communication. So you can go as far as that, and then you can go in between, right? So it's the level of control is important to understand for a firm as to like what they want to do and what they don't want to do, because that excludes different providers, right? Some of them do that one end, some of them don't. Some of them do the whole system, right?
Yeah.
But you've got to then be very clear on expectations, because I've seen it also too often that a firm, especially like with bigger firms, when they have a way that they want it done and they have a way that they're very used to hiring people and not necessarily on a very strict on process, they have a lot of conflict between cultures of no, we want people, but they're doing it more traditionally. So now there's a clash in culture between am I working for this firm or am I working for my outsourcing provider? So they'll go to their
Right.
outsourcing provider first because that's who they talk to day, right? And
Yeah.
they'll maybe the provider or the sorry, the firm doesn't even get involved in like let's say if they put in notice or anything until like last minute, right? So they have no control over those pieces. So it's important to know what you want, right? So it's I would say small firms, it's better going more upstream on the ladder, typically because you have more control over the security, but it's just in terms of systems. If you have strong systems, go the traditional route. If you have less strong systems and you're more reliant on finding the right person for your culture and fit, go slightly further down the ladder
Yeah. Yeah. And when you say slightly further down the ladder, you mean like
towards like an
hiring?
employer of record, right? That
Okay.
will facilitate like the sourcing of candidates. They may have infrastructure, they'll sort out the hardware, but they're not going to manage that team member for you. You're reliant on managing the team member because then you won't have any like conflict of culture, right? They're just facilitating they're your employee, like contractor.
Okay. Very cool. Yeah, hopefully that helps a lot of people because it certainly helps me know what I should be looking for in the future. um it does. I went through from one end of the spectrum to the very opposite end. Like I was like, no, I just need you to actually have this person as your employee, and then I'm just going to tell that person everything I need them to do. um and so that ended up working for me thus far. So
Yeah,
as a team, we have one person offshore, and she's wonderful, but she does work for another. She works for an agency offshore. She does not work technically for us. Like she's
yeah,
not one of our employees. Um, and so uh yeah, there is like this, she reports to them, not to us. We do have direct contact with her. She's like in our Slack channel. She is part of our culture, but at the end of the day, you know, a lot of times we'll be like, can you do this? And she's like, well, I have to check. Right. And so it's like, well, okay, go check, you know.
yeah,
So
yeah. No,
which
and there's some things outside of scope then that come up,
yeah,
right? So
right.
so that they may charge for, right? So
Yeah.
it really, but you've and the big thing is testing, right? Not
Hmm.
thinking that it's going to be perfect, that it's going to be the same as what we've done, right? You tested one end, you went to
Yep.
somebody else, then you started doing it, and you figure out what the best fit is, right? So
Yeah.
so don't be worried about like don't be afraid to do a controlled test, really, to test different vendors at the same time to figure out like
Yeah.
which is the better fit for you, because
Right.
it's a hugely important thing, especially in this profession. I feel that relationships are huge,
Yeah.
right? So finding the one that's a good fit is very important.
Yep. Yep. And so let's move into like, a lot of firms. I talked to a firm owner today, and I was, talking about how a lot of firm owners, they end up being more reactive when it comes to hiring, right? They're always in this reactive mode where they're hiring when it's too late. It's not that it's too late, but it's too late. Like you got a dumpster fire on your hands, right? And
Yeah,
so now you have this dumpster fire that you're trying to put out this fire. You got 13 other fires going on, and you are just looking, you ultimately they end up hiring somebody that has a pulse. It's like, you have a pulse? Oh,
yep,
you've looked at a
yep,
number before? Oh, you. You know how to log onto a computer? Okay, perfect. To help me put out this dumpster fire. And then they find themselves disappointed with these people that they hired in this reactive mode that they were struggling, and it's because, they didn't realize that they were going to need this person down the line. Where I'm a fan of always be proactive and always be hiring, know who you're looking for. And it's this idea of like, if I asked you today to tell me how many blue cars that you saw today, you'd be like, well, I don't freaking know, right? But if I said, I want you to look for blue cars, well, then you'd probably see blue cars everywhere, right? You'd be like, oh my God, I saw like 32 blue cars. I'm seeing blue cars everywhere. So this is this proactive approach when it comes to hiring. It's like when you know exactly who you're looking for, when you know who you want to hire, it becomes that I'm always hiring. I know I'm always looking for that next person. And so you hire that person like a year before you actually ever need that person, right? And you don't
Yeah.
you don't hire them, you don't start paying them, but you put them in your roster, right? You take their information. You say, I might contact you. Like, let's talk. Let's get on Zoom. Let's talk. What do you got going on, right? I'm having conversations with people all the time. In fact, I just had a conversation with somebody yesterday that I said, I'm gonna get back to you. I like what you sent me. Um, this is good. I don't need you right now, but I might need you in the future. I'll follow up with you. And so it's it's this concept of if you know what you're going to need and you know that you're going to need somebody and you can hire that person before you turn into the dumpster fire, you're going to be in a better situation. You're going to scale with ease more. Your clients are going to be taken care of. You're not going to put yourself in these stressful situations.
Yeah.
So this has been my theory for a long time, and it's really probably the reason that I've been able to scale both companies that I've grown, because I've always been hiring, because I'm I'm going to call myself a lazy entrepreneur. I just really never wanted to do a lot of the work. I was like, nah, I don't want to do that. So I got to find somebody, right? So what do you think that everyone listening today or jumps on this replay, what can they do to prepare for offshoring effectively? Like, what should they start thinking about, and what should they be looking for? What should they start thinking about in their own firms to really put the pieces together to be able to prepare themselves?
Yeah, so again, as you're saying, like I start identifying internally, like as to what things they want to do, what things they don't want to do, right? And what things again, if they're growing, right? What are the things in the future that they want to get off their plate, right? And already knowing that is hugely important because you can start working towards that now before you get full to the brim and overflowing with work, right? Now, the benefit to the offshoring element is obviously it's a lot more cost effective. So you can generally invest in it a little bit quicker than you can necessarily an onshore resource because financially you've got to be prepared as well, right? So you should be building up a financial pool, right? So that the first 3 to 6 months of that person's salary are covered, right? Now it's a lot easier to do that with an offshore team member than necessarily an onshore team member, right? But now, so now you essentially prepared from that perspective, right? The piece when you start talking to outsourcing firms is very important though, because the same way as recruiting is, right, and constantly looking at people, start talking to the providers early, figure out who the right fit is for you based on your requirements, like what type of service that you want, whether you want that traditional, whether you want the employer of record, figure out who that is, right, in the early stages and now start that interviewing process, right? You can be in a lot of cases, like the traditional route, they may have resources ready for you, right? So you don't have to necessarily start the process with them as quickly. But when it's an employer of record, you still have to, it takes like a lot of the times a month to 2 months to really like go through the hiring process because they may have 30 days notice they have to give to their prior employer, could be up to 2 months in a lot of cases, right? They also have to you also have to do the testing, like the interviews, and so that takes a month, right? So it ends up being a 3 month process anyway, right? So you need to somewhat be thinking in advance proactively to actually getting them on board. Right. So just to keep that in mind because now you can be cognizant of let me do more interviews than less and find the right fit candidate for me as well, rather than necessarily, like you said, like wait. If you wait until tax season and you're doing taxes in your firm, like, and a lot of firms try and pick people up in like January, right? January, even closer to February in a lot of cases, where it's like the work is, I understand the work doesn't necessarily come in until February, like mid-February in a lot of cases, but now you've had zero time to train, right?
Right.
You've also got the whatever's left over type people because you haven't invested in the good people initially when there is actually less work going on. So now they're the people looking for roles prior to the busy season, right? They're already in a process. They don't want to make a shift because they know they're not going to be able to perform well in that type of environment in a lot of cases, making a shift last minute. You're going to pay more for that type of person because it's last minute, right? And you generally have to give them a signing bonus and all these extra things, right? Even with an outsourcing firm, well, they're going to charge you more because it's they know it's a need, right? So give yourself time, and it comes down to you. You will be more stressed out if you bring somebody on in February rather than in October, November, December, when you've got a bit of work, you can test with them, and now and that investment period is so important, right? To just get them understanding. And if they don't work, get somebody else, right? If they don't work in the middle of like in February, you don't have time to get anybody else, right? So now it ends up all that work falls back onto you, right? So you end up hurting yourself in the long run if you do that, right? And I see that that's a common mistake that a lot of firms do, especially for like seasonality type work that they have internally. They just wait until last minute because I got my need, but they have zero training time, zero feedback that goes back. So they never have a good result, right?
Yeah. That's awesome. I just wrote all those notes and sent them over in the chat too. So everyone has that uh so they can see exactly what they need to do. So uh yeah, that's super helpful. Hopefully that helps a lot of you guys with iterates, what I started with there, but actually iterates like, okay, yeah, my thinking is right and what I'm telling people is right because it's crazy to see, and I see it all the time. It's like, well, I haven't been able to work on my marketing because I, I hired this person to help me in tax season, but then they didn't work out. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, you didn't know they were going to not work out like before tax season. Like we have to, that's something that we should have probably figured out. Like it's different if you had somebody on your team for, 2 years and then that didn't
Yeah.
work out. Like, but yeah, we should be, or at least even bring on two people that are potentially going to split the work. So that way, that you at least have one person to fall back on. Right.
Yeah.
And the idea of bringing on two people, in my opinion, is you bring on two people. If one is terrible, at least you have a backup. You have a fall guy, right? Like, hey, we have to let go of this other one because it's not good, but you're great, so we're going to keep you, right?
Yeah.
Nothing's wrong with a little friendly competition, right? Like
Correct.
this one's a higher performer, it's getting the work done, so we're going to give you the work. Um
Yeah, and I would advise that for like firms that again they know they have enough work, right, for at least one person, right? It may be a bit more than that, right?
mhm,
And they clearly have the financial perspective in mind, right? They've got enough built up where again, hiring two offshore especially, like it's not going to make a big dent, right? And again, put them it creates security, right? I mean, there's if you have two people now, you only have to invest in the training once, right, at the
yep,
same time, right? And it's again friendly competition between the two as to, all right, it's not necessarily that in 3 months' time, like you're definitely going to get rid of one, but it's of the mindset that okay, it's still better to invest and they're both 50% utilized. And now you've got room to grow and you can start taking more things off your plate in comparison to, okay, I'm going to start with one who is fully utilized. And then if it doesn't work, now what am I doing? Right. Now
right,
I've got to go through the whole process again, train again, do this again. Right. So now you've created sort of more bandwidth for yourself to be able to scale. And if one leaves, like you said, I mean, okay, now that one person is fully utilized, but you've had some training with them, like you know what they're good at. So that's really just then, okay, now you can go through the process and they can hopefully help train as well. And you can help find ways to support them in growth as well. So it is a constant sort of system. And if you go with a provider, typically they can help with those things where you maybe get a part-time resource rather than a full-time resource. And you create flexibility that way.
Yeah. So my last question for you, and then we do have one more question here that I'm going to ask, uh, is what are your like best tips on actually training offshore? Like what would you say is like non-negotiable? This is what you have to do.
So you have to do video, right? In terms of like, work on your process a little bit, right? In terms of making sure it's very clear as to there's a very defined process that they're going to be working on. Okay. When you are training, it should be over video and it should generally be, yes, you can do group training, but you should spend time doing one-on-one type sessions, especially when it comes to virtual workers, especially when it comes to offshore team members, because a lot of them, they're culturally, they don't necessarily love to speak up in group environments, right? So they're more likely going to say yes to something rather than necessarily fully understanding and saying that they don't understand it. Right. When you're building that relationship one on one, you're able to they're actually able to speak up a lot quicker in a lot of cases. So I see, and also showing demos, right, of doing things. Don't think about it from a training perspective of, hey, let me just give them a standard operating procedure and it's done there. That document should have, again, go on Vimeo, right? Go on, we've got Teams, we've got Zoom. Start recording the types of process that you're doing as well, so that they have examples, right? People are visual learners, people are audio learners, right? So you can very easily create like training sessions within everything you've got is right there at your fingertips, right? So just start, and you don't have to like be super creative to do it. Go through your typical process of what you're doing on a day to day. Start recording yourself, build up like a video library and a knowledge bank because you've got all access to it, right? You can even use ChatGPT and other things to now grab the transcript, create a process document. So those are the pieces that I think are super important that firms can start doing because they do it a little bit at the intern and the staff level and the basic roles. I think that's a lot easier for firms to put together. But as soon as it becomes like review level work, senior associates, as soon as it gets up to the partner level work, they believe it can't be replicated when it can, right? But they
Yeah,
have to
yeah,
sit back and record it, and it makes life a lot easier to show that, oh wait, I can actually create a process and controls around this. But it's very difficult if you don't have anything documented down. So that'd be sort of one of the biggest tips.
yeah. It's funny because that's like one of the biggest things that I have been working with our firm owners is like a lot of like review and even advisory work can 100% be replicated by your team. It's, you know, like knowing an example is like knowing what type of variance you want to look for. So, say you're reviewing a P&L and you want to give feedback to the client on their P&L from the previous month. Well, it's like look for a variance of 13% for the previous month. So like you just set a standard. And
Yep.
so it's like, okay, anything that is a variance of 13%, we're going to notate, right? That's it. Like we're going to notate, we're going to tell them why it happened, and we're going to add notes, right? That's it. That's all we have to do. And then we can send that report with notes saying this is why there's a 13% or more variance, either above or below from the previous month. And so this is like how you do this review work. And it's such easy ways of doing it. But we think like, oh no, this advisory level work can't be replicated. Like I'm the one who has the knowledge. And it's not always that you have the knowledge, it's just teaching somebody else to be analytical, right?
Yeah, correct.
Um, so I have a couple questions in here from Nicole. I'm actually going to go with this last one because we do have to wrap up here. We're coming up on the hour. What's like a red flag that you would look for when it comes to offshoring work and outsourcing offshore? What are some red flags that you would you would say we should look out for as we're doing this?
So red flags, I think everybody gets, and I can guarantee everybody gets in their LinkedIn messages and emails, most likely daily, a different outsourcing firm approaching you, right? So it's a big I wouldn't say it's a red flag, but you have to do your due diligence on and not necessarily just strictly trust what is being said to you because a lot of people there are a lot of small businesses in every location offshore that a lot of people have been in an outsourcing firm or they've worked for a CPA firm's back office and what they've done is said, you know what, I can do it better, right? Or I can do this myself, and they want to go off and wrap up and start themselves. But and it's not that they can't, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you should be the first person they're testing it,
Yeah.
right? And a
You're
lot
their
of them
guinea
will
pig.
correct, and a lot of them will say because it's stretching the truth, right? Is that they have worked with a CPA firm, or they've worked with an accounting firm, or they've worked with a book because they probably have in the background, or they've worked with multiple with their prior employer, but they may not have any clients right now, right? They may not have many systems in place, they may not have any structure in place. So again, that's where getting verification of those types of things from a perspective of okay, go and ask for a video of the actual office, right? And it shouldn't just be a clearly just a recorded video and not seeing anybody in there and things like that. You should be able to see the people that you're interacting with from that office. Okay. If they're just a startup, they're probably not, they may have an office like a WeWork or they may have a smaller office, right? But do they actually have a lot of the processes and systems in place that a lot of the slightly larger firms have? Probably not. They haven't dealt with hiring people, right? They haven't necessarily gone through that process. So it's more, it's not a clear red flag, but it's more make sure you do your due diligence on the providers that are approaching you, right? Generally you are going to get an email from somebody when you are most at need because they're emailing you and they're messaging you every day anyway, right? So don't just go with that provider because they've got in touch with you there and then, right? Go and do your due diligence, test out some providers, right? Give a limited amount of work as well so you can do some testing, okay? And don't just jump into it like head first, right? Because the biggest mistake you can make is going into it in the deep end, right? And you overwhelming yourself. And now you thinking that this was a big fail. I don't want to do it again. Because it's very similar to hiring. People come and go, right? Don't take it personally, right? You may have to do the process over and over again, but it's creating systems where it's now less effort to do so is very important, right? So even the first time you're doing it, document everything, right? I mean, I know when I was starting my business, it was as soon as I go into my advisory type services, I have a virtual assistant. She goes and organizes everything for me. Anything I ask her to do, I ask her to create a document, a standard operating procedure of how to do it. So that
Yep.
just in case she leaves, I've got that, I've got the job responsibilities, every single thing I ask for, she has to document and she has to create that standardization to it. Because otherwise, it's now I've got to remember what I've asked somebody to do previously, remember how I taught them how to do it. And but I also don't want to be responsible, like you said, for actually documenting and making that process and that training document. So she does it for me, right?
Yeah.
So it's those types of things like I wouldn't. There is no like super red flag. Obviously, if you don't like them, I would use gut a little bit as well, right? And also, do you like working with them? If you're not going to listen to them as a partner, then don't work with them
Yeah.
because you should. They're offshore. If especially if they're offshore, right? They are somebody you should be relying on, trusting, right? So if you don't aren't going to listen to them and aren't going to listen to advice they give you, and it's dealing with team members offshore as well, they have a different culture, right? In a lot of cases, so you have to listen and learn, right?
Yeah.
So definitely find a partner that you can listen to and you can work with, right? And invest that time into finding that right one.
Yeah, I love it. Awesome. Well, Lawrence, I think the last question I have for you is where can people find you? Where do you have anything that people can download, a checklist or anything like that that you want to drop so people can come into your world and find out more about what you do and how they can get support from you?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm all over LinkedIn. I've got
Okay.
podcast as well. You're welcome to come on and listen to, again, different people that
Yes.
giving you advice from the advisory side for a firm, but also like I talk to a lot of outsourcing firms where you can go in and listen to them in advance. Like, what do they have to say? What best practices are they sharing? Um, but find me on LinkedIn, right? Give me a quick search. That's the best place. You can contact me directly. I've got my contact information on there as well. And then I do have, like I said, I created a best practice toolkit, which gives a lot of information. It gives a lot of checklists, like self-assessment reporting, right? Go in and look at yourself. Due diligence sheets you can go and perform with an outsourcing firm to make sure you've addressed everything, at least from a standard perspective, right? So I've got all these forms that I've created. So you reach out to me. I can provide you that full document, right? It's about 50 pages. So there's lots of information there and lots of information on culture, everything. So just shoot me a message. I can provide you a link to it as well. I think I've got a link to the online version of it too that I can provide you.
Awesome. I just dropped your LinkedIn in the chat for people so they can have that. And then is our podcast episode live yet?
I think it is, yeah. So I will double check. Yeah.
Because I'm just thinking, oh, I should put that episode. I'll drop that episode for everybody.
Yeah, I've got a feeling it did come out. I need to double check, but I'm pretty sure it did. I'll be able to get you.
Oh, I think I found it. I found it on YouTube. So this one for you guys. And let's see. Oh, there it is. Thank you. All right. And then here it is on Spotify, which is my favorite place to listen to podcasts. So,
Yeah. So no,
so
and again, like it's so there's different aspects that we go over on there, but there's a big focus around the staffing side, right? Best practices around it. It's not a promotional side of things, so it's really things firms can take away, right? And again, I had a list on because again, the marketing piece and being able to have the time to focus on those types of strategies is hugely important for
yeah.
firms. So, but no, really appreciate the time, Melissa.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, everybody go check out what Lawrence is up to. Go check out that Spotify episode, Business Beyond
Orders.
Borders. I was like, am I saying borders? Is that what it is? Yes, that makes sense because it's offshore.
Yep.
Yes, Business Beyond Borders. So go check that out. And thank you everyone who joined us today. Today was a lot of fun. Thanks again, Lawrence, for jumping on, and we will talk to you all very soon. Bye, guys.
Thanks. Bye.